Mabuhay everyone! I'm Jin Mizuse and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Literary, where we synthesize everything that we have learned from a series of modules from our course, World Literature. So this vlog speaks about my journey towards everything that I have come across with the different topics that were covered, as well as the activities that I have accomplished throughout the duration of this term. I've realized a different perspective about the world through stories written from the heart and soul of these esteemed writers while they confront the colonial legacies and making sense of our desires through their masterpiece. So each module um molded me not just a mere reader or a bystander trying to be aware, but actually trying to make meaning by being human and enriching my knowledge and understanding on different cultures, identity, and what they mean to other people. So join me as I walk you through the takeaways that I have learned from each module, as well as my thoughts from the activities and how they all contributed to my growth and deep respect for humanity in general. So let's get started and talk in literary. I want to commence this synthesis from module one. So this module covered topics regarding real life context, related to our national identity and how the global society see us. National context struck me when I read the part where literature does not lose its meaning solely for the purpose of being translated, but on how it is being presented and brought on this world. According to Damroach, this can cause some different meaning to others who see the literary work, which became the reason why he compared world literature as a venue of dispersion and as a mode of reading. As he also did point out, when these works are put out and open for everyone to read, they have a tendency to be remolded to emphasize this type of universal understanding in a simplest tone. Ignoring the national challenges that the locals face, this points out to my main inquiry: what will we miss when these works are put out in the global arena? An example would be Chekhov's subtle satire that speaks a lot about us, and Anton's Chekhov's an enigmatic nature. He did use his humor about the character's naivety, about the challenges she faced, and it's like an iceberg. Because yes, I'm looking at you, Fred. I'm looking at you, Prude. So, as you can see on the tip of the iceberg, it appears to be funny sketch of a woman's ideals about romance, but deep down, we can see that Chekhov is actually providing um a position about the shallowness of these ideas about how we form connections with other people. It shows the history of Russia before the revolution, serving the front stage of the happy empire with all the celebrations happening around the palace. But on the backdrop, it exposed the resentment from the other people who work for these royals who sacrifices blood, sweat, and tears to keep their grandire up and running. Yikes, that is why this meaning may be ignored unless we really know the history of Russia. Another example would be this short Pixar film titled Bao. So it tells the story of a mother who's having a hard time amidst her son wanting for independence. This film used symbols such as the food called the bao dumpling, which represents the culture in Chinese families. However, let's also take a notice on its meaning. When we think literary, we will sense that the maternal love and loss is a universal feeling. Yes, we all relate to it. It shows us that emotions binds all the gaps rather that different culture have, further allowing both specific and relatable do coexist. So we can now see that when stories are rooted in how we feel as human beings, national narratives can still resonate with us globally. Now, let's move on to our next module. So, well, some of you may agree that stereotypes have the ability to belittle and undermine stories. And people, Module 2 just did that. It focused on our colonial past and how it still persists in the present day. Sad, but I'll give you one. In Chimamanda Ngozi's Adichie's TED Talk, correct me if I'm wrong, the danger of a single story. She talked about how growing up in British literature made her absorb status quo as default, and how others belittled her Nigerian identity by relating it to poverty. It made me feel as though we are too judgmental on how we look on other cultures, that these types of literature is not just about historical distortion. It counters the rich narrative of people who actually belong to that culture, forming a dangerous narrative of diminishing their truth as people. It it actually made me appreciate post-colonial literature even more. That is, it is defiance against being misrepresented. This made me realize that me as a Filipino, we can also fall into this trap of simplistic narratives about who we are as a nation. Um, Another example of how post-colonial authors can make us feel what Chekhov has stated. They also weaponize humor and irony to bring back what's theirs, and that includes issues about race. In Wo Soyinka's telephone conversation, I remember a black man calls a white landlady to ask about the flat that she's renting. The white woman hesitated to share some details about the flat upon learning that he's talking to a black man. So that poem is hinting on sarcasm and irony in the tone. The speaker's the speaker's politeness in story is hit with a very sharp take on the issue of race. Soyinka did just that. She exposes racism without having to scream about it. So, this masterpiece made me consider how colonized people have learned to speak in subtleties, use humor as their protective gear, and survive through defense. So, do you know that animation can be political too? Yes, you've heard that right. The short animation film Not Poor just also did that. It basically threw away the usual trope about poverty. Instead of presenting the characters as helpless and needy, this short art animation film showed pride, resilience, courage, and collectivity. But it also mocks NGOs and the media oversimplify poverty to promote charity, but actually rob people of moral as dense of their moral and hunger for social change. The colonial rather literature here is strong. And it tells us that people are more than their financial and social economic hardships, and they deserve dignity, not pity. So now let's move on to the deep dive into the mid body and desire. this cover topics for Module 3, we now also realize that language can also reveal our unconscious desires and feelings. Another fluid reference I know in Luisa Valenzuela's vision out of the corner of one eye, we can understand the hunting reality of a woman who's trying to explore a highly patriarchal space. So that story dims the difference between reality and paranoia, where where patriarchy becomes very invisible and yet still intrudes the body and mind of women. It's very subtle, but it does haunt me because it portrays a gendered fear and shows how language can trend wildly around violence while still making you feel how heavy the story is. So, how do we reclaim the body through poetry? Rupi Kaur's spoken word, I'm taking my body back, delve into surviving sexual assault and further reclaiming autonomy over one's body. So that the power that the poetry holds is very direct and straightforward. This is where it confronts us to embrace the uncomfortable in art. It further reminded me that when we think literary, we do not always assume romance or comedy, but it allows us to achieve moral agency, seeks for justice, and challenge prevailing systems. Carr shows that literature can be a space for us to heal, to seek comfort, even when the system and bureaucracy fails to listen. And lastly, for this module, I have realized that desire can also mean the need for us to be seen. Dear Evan Hansen did just that by delving further into teenage anxiety and that the desire for wanting to belong. In a world driven by performance and appearances, the characters in this musical crave authenticity. Their pain cannot be seen in the naked eye, but can instead be felt. For me, this brought attention to how literature must also give voice to mental health issues. I believe it is not enough to talk about our external desires, but we must also explore the internal ones. Moving on to what I have learned from class lectures and activities, I'd like to commend our lecture on the hero's journey, as it helped me realize that many of the stories we have encountered, as you can see, it follows a cycle that is all familiar to us. Even if their heroes aren't like those in Marvel or DC, they still fight systems, trauma, and identify loss. This gave me an idea that storytelling is about genuine change, and every story carried the ability. The mystery box, on the other hand, taught me on how the master of art questioning this game trained us to find meaning in what's not immediately visible. It made me value abstract concepts and the reader's role in completing a narrative. And to put it at that, it made the elements rather of fiction grounded my understanding. The formal elements really gave me rather the vocabulary to engage with writings that went beyond just feelings. I could now explain why a story made me feel a certain way. It gave me the right tools rather to balance my emotions with objectivity. Now, as you can see from all that I have learned, I've become more sensitive. I've become a more sensitive reader. I am no longer here for the vibe alone, but I am now as who is speaking and who is being silenced in the story. I have learned to see stories with empathy and respect for their own context. I've also become a better listener and a literary thinker. They taught how to sit with discomfort. These are skills I'll carry with me along the way in whatever place or field I enter. So this course, world literature, reminded me that literature should not be out of reach. It's a necessity. It reflects our truth, and restore our dignity. This subject has shaped not only how I read, but how I see and treat people. Every other gave me something so much to carry through. So until next time, let's talk literary.